I'm gonna be 100% honest with you, until recently, tragedies were my least favorite type of story. And it was honestly Liam O'Brien's characters, specifically Caleb Widogast, who helped me come to terms with that and realize that I actually did like them, but I didn't like the story that they communicated because it communicates a reality I don't necessarily want to accept. And yet Caleb Widogast was an excellent exploration of that story, while also still allowing us to accept the reality and feel a sense of hopefulness, which is something that I think is so important for so many people in the world. This is the story of Caleb Widogast, tragedy, and the healing that comes from it, and the scars which make us beautiful.
I'm not a good person, but we are friends. We are friends.
We are friends.
Now, before we get on with the video, I want to talk about today's sponsors, and if you can hold on just a second, I legitimately think this is one of the coolest things that I've ever seen. MASTERSCREEN is a fully free online source that you can use on any sort of device to basically run your entire game. It lets you roll dice online, it lets you make a 3D interactive map, it lets you in real time make quick spells or items that actually affect the players, and on top of all of that, it also has a free open source market where you can go and get different adventures and sources. I mean, I'm not kidding, this thing is absolutely amazing, and it's basically the whole package, entirely free, browser-based, and can be used on any type of device. I personally have already started using this in my games the moment that I found out about it, and I found it incredibly intuitive, especially due to its fully marked down system where you can basically organize anything that you need so you never lose it. Please go check it out and let them know that Player Roll sent you. Caleb Widogast, when we first meet him, is a dirty, grungy, and smelly wizard. And that's all he is. In fact, that's all we know about him. Liam goes out of his way to make sure we don't know hardly anything about him, and because of the way that Liam plays in this incredible way of he tends to stay out of the spotlight until it is his time to shine, much like any theater actor would, he typically doesn't let us know too much about the character, and it's the same with Caleb. We know that he has a connection with Nott, and that him and Nott have been traveling together, and he's supposed to be Nott's protector, and he's pretty skittish. That's what we know about him. In fact, most of the details we get about him are from Laura making up stuff about him.
This blue-skinned tiefling suddenly leans over to you at the table.
Don't move.
7 silver for you.
Don't move. Tieflings can only see movement.
And 16 copper.
I don't think
It's
that's
very true. We have a hard time seeing things that aren't moving. It's very true. But I can hear you. You should take a bath. You know they have showers here. It's possible.
What now?
You bathe yourself in water.
No, I've bathed before. Yeah, I know what a bath
You
is.
smell really bad and it's wafting over this direction. I'm just letting you know. I would hate if I smelled that bad and someone didn't tell me.
I have only just met you.
Hi, I'm Jester.
Hi, I'm Caleb.
Nice to meet you, Caleb.
And so as time goes on, we begin to see Caleb and sort of start to get to know who he is, but not too much. We see him get downed in one of the first combats, and well, we know that he's not that strong, and Liam's not afraid to show that.
So you suffer as the stinger hits you for 7 points of piercing damage.
All right.
I need you to make a Constitution saving throw, please.
No problem. There's a 12.
A 12? A 12 succeeds. So you only suffer 5 points of poison damage.
Caleb is unconscious on the ground.
We see that he's a very frail individual who is typically fairly brave, but is very concerned about the world around him and always keeping a look over his shoulder, which means he more than likely has a dark past. Shocking for a Liam character. The more we get to know him, the more we begin to realize that he is running from something. Something happened in his past that he's trying to get away of, and it is a very slow burn reveal of realizing what happened to him until the point where he suddenly just lets it all out in a moment of strong vulnerability with his friend Bo and his long-term friend Nott.
I am going to tell you the story of how I murdered my mother and father. So we rose through the ranks, and it was the empire over all, and eventually he wanted to test our allegiance, and so strangers were brought in, traitors, disgusting people, traitors to this empire, and we killed them.
And then one day your parents were brought in as traitors. No.
I'm getting ahead of myself. You know, I went home. I went on a trip home and visited my parents. And when I was there in the middle of the night, I awoke and overheard them talking and went to the stair and listened to them talk about revolution and tearing the Empire down. I knew it had to be done. Then we went to my home and we grabbed a horse cart and in the middle of the night placed it against the door to the home and I set it on fire.
This is a heartbreaking, genuinely harsh scene where we begin to realize everything that he has ever gone through. It's a giant trauma dump, to be honest, and it was very interesting to see all of it come out at once in this purely, unequivocally unfiltered way of just laying it all out, the horrible things that he had done, and suddenly everything that he has done up to this point begins to make sense. He looks over his shoulder, yes, he's scared, yes, but it is only partly because he's being hunted. The other portion is because he truly believes that the universe is trying to punish him for his horrible misdeeds. And while yes, he's a very analytical mind and he won't say that out loud, he seems to truly believe that there is going to be karma coming from him, that it's going to catch up with him, and his only hope is to get away from it. And so over the course of time, we begin to realize that his intent learning of magic is not just to become more powerful to help not, but to be able to reverse the very thing that he once did. It's an interesting character because we get fully loaded up front everything he's gone through. But now we have to unpack that and realize where he's trying to go. I talk a lot about story arcs, character arcs specifically. And for Caleb, it is fascinating because it was so clear that Liam really intended him to go down a negative character arc, to give in to these horrible inclinations that he had, to give in to the terrible insistence he had on following a self-destructive path. Because we begin to realize that Caleb's obsession with chronergist magic is for one specific reason. The reason he's trying to learn dunomancy is so that he can rewind time and stop himself from making the largest mistake he has ever made. This seems like an excellent conclusion, an awesome solution to what he's done, but we as an audience realize something Caleb doesn't. The very act of doing this would solve the action that he did, but it will not solve the pain that he receives. And this is the tragedy of Caleb Widogast. The intention of trying to undo his most horrible thing that he's ever done, his intention to undo killing his own parents, but by doing so, he will forever leave himself a broken man, a torn man. He will forever be scarred with wounds that will never heal. Because think about it. Think about the true tragedy of if he had gone through with this, if he had gone back in time and gone through his whole plan. He himself states that he had figured out how to make it work. He had figured out how to do it without breaking time and it would all be okay. But would it? He would forever live with his parents knowing that he killed them. He would forever live with them seeing in their eyes that they knew what he had done, that he had not truly undone his actions, that he had gone through with killing them. And he would forever know in his own heart that he had killed his own family, that he had given in and done the worst thing possible that he could never come back from. There is a difference between undoing an action and coming to terms with what you did. And that was what Caleb needed to do and what his friends so desperately wanted for him. Bo insisted on trying to help him come to terms with what he did, to accept that it was horrible, as she said.
Caleb, that's deeply fucked up. You know that, right?
Yeah.
She was not in any sort of form of the way trying to undermine what he had done. She was not trying to make it seem less than it was. It was terrible because that's what he needed to accept, that it was terrible, it was horrible. He made an awful mistake, but he was not unredeemable for it. And over the course of the story, we see him coming to terms with this until he becomes an unstoppable force that meets an immovable object in the form of Essek. Essek is a full mirror of Caleb. He's a full mirror of all the horrible things that Caleb has done, but twofold. He has done more. He's caused more death, more anguish. He has done more lying. He is irredeemable, and yet Caleb cannot find a way to find him irredeemable. He wants to. He wants so badly to condemn Essek, because if he can condemn Essek for everything he's done, then he sure as hell should be condemned, and yet he doesn't.
Essek. We don't trust him either. The question is, one, do you trust us?
But if I am to be honest, I am jealous of the bravery and confidence you have in such things. I am still a coward.
Coward? You have dared much.
I have done everything for myself. And when any of it came to bear, I have done everything I can to hide and flee. I fear I would make this messier than you need to make it work. Does that make sense?
You've committed sins in your home. So have I. You talked about wanting to make up for them. If the appropriate amount of ability and skill is not wrought against this enemy, it could spread across every inch of the world we know.
He can only see the goodness in Essek because the people around him also see that good, also want him to be redeemed. It's funny because over the course of the story, everybody tries to convince Caleb that he's possible to be redeemed, that he's not that terrible, but he doesn't listen. Because that's not how it works in our own lives. People can tell us that all the time, but if our brain is telling us something different, then we are going to feel irredeemable. We are not going to listen to the outside forces because there is no way they can know how we feel. And yet the perfect thing that could have been done to help Caleb come to terms with things is watching everybody else in the group forgive somebody else. They weren't just saying it to be nice. They weren't forgiving him just to forgive him. He watched an entire group of people who he cared about find redeeming qualities in somebody who was irredeemable in his own eyes, twofold above himself.
It's a tough ultimatum.
Yeah. Although it's pretty simple, though, right?
Happens.
Simple. We're choosing between Essek and Iki.
Fucking dice.
Yeah, we get one dedicated ally that we know doesn't want the thing that we're trying to keep out of the hands of Lucian, and on the other side, we get more hands, perhaps more power, but a almost certainty that they will try and keep whatever they prevent Lucian from doing for themselves.
Yeah.
It's
Just
the
really
one
left
person that
right
we
them
can.
at the end.
Yeah, the last thing that we need is for some double crossing, other complication. when
I'm
we're dealing
frustrated.
with
I feel like we could have worked it, but one person that we can trust is better than three that we cannot.
I agree.
Agreed.
Yeah.
They could turn on us in the middle of the fight.
All right. Have you decided?
Yes, Essek, we are going to stick with you. We feel we can trust you more than my old teacher.
Also, that guy, he can't float.
You're not wrong. You see, like, when you say the word trust, it's simultaneously like seeing a small hit to the heart, and whatever icy bit that cracked kind of melts away for a minute. Like there's a moment of him hearing the word and letting it wash over him almost. I'm thankful for the trust you put in me, and I hope to make this up to you.
And many times in life, it is the same way. We feel that we've done something horrible, that we can't be fixed, that it's too broken. And then we see somebody else who is not us overcoming those odds through the help of others. And we realize, in the weirdest possible way, the most enlightening thing, we're not special. And it's incredible to not feel special in that moment. There is nothing under the sun that we could have done that has not happened before. And yes, we have to live with it. Those scars are not going to go away, but we can eventually allow ourselves to heal, to stop picking at those wounds and accept the help. Accept the love that others are willing to give, because if somebody else is worthy of redemption, shouldn't we be too? Caleb was a story that was supposed to be about tragedy, and I still believe it was. Even at the end of the story, he was clearly not healed. He's still clearly hurt. He still clearly hadn't forgiven himself. But at the end of the day, he received the option to go back to fix, at least in his mind, the mistakes he made. And he realized that that was not going to do what he wanted it to. The only way to move forward was to finally look inside of himself, see what he did, accept that as true, and know that it's okay. That yes, that was what happened, it was never going to go away, but it did not make him impossible to grow again. It was ashes that had burned him to the ground, much like his house. But he could grow out of those ashes once again. He could find something lovable in himself again, because he could change, because he had the ability to. Much like Essek, much like everybody else in his group, he knew he had a chance to become something more. And so Caleb Widogast, the dirty, scrungy, stinky wizard who never would have seen a redeeming quality in themselves, chose to look at what everybody else was doing for others and decide he was worth doing it to himself. So please, everybody out there, remember, no matter what you've done, there's always the option to change your actions in the future. You are not going to escape what you did. It will still remain, but it doesn't mean that you are not capable of regrowing from that and becoming the person that you wish you were. So go out into the world and make it your own.